Yes, I'm here. A little bit late. Sorry. Um, I'd open gates and all that kind of stuff. So better late than never. Still setting up here. Um, let's see. There we are. There's the Discord server. There's the Q&A. We've had some trouble at church with our network. Rick updated the firmware on our PTZ camera that we use for Sunday morning live stream, and that has caused issues in our network that we don't understand. And Rick is working on it, and I have utmost confidence that Rick will figure it out. So Rick is in conversation with the camera people, and yeah, I'm gonna get another monitor here so I can keep an eye on the chat, make sure everyone behaves themselves. We've got plenty of moderators. I know that's controversial because they tend to use their wrenches. So here we go. Got to fix it. Got to fix it. Get GPT to fix it. Yeah, I don't think Chat GPT is going to fix our situation with our PTZ camera. So let's see what we got here. What we're doing today is, so as you've probably noticed, I've been playing around with what to do with this Friday morning slot, Friday morning for California, different time of day for the rest of you, I'm sure. I've done week in review stuff. That was okay. Last couple of weeks, I did live streams with some different individuals, and I've got some coming up with some others who have been on the channel before. One of the things I got in one of the messages I got in the tour last summer was bring back some of the people that you've done randos conversations with. So I'm doing some of that. So yeah, figuring it out. Obviously, last week's randos conversations were very well received. I didn't do any randos conversation. Well, I didn't do any official randos conversations this week because it's just been a crazy week with a parking lot, and we had a death in the church, and it's just a busy time of month. It's going to be a busy summer again. We've got an event. I've got an event. Well, I've got an event with Jonathan Peugeot and John Vervaeke coming up in a couple of weeks in May in Chino. If you haven't heard about that, sign up. You can't buy tickets all the way up to the event because Vendonk is very fastidious, and he food is included. Friday lunch and dinner, Saturday breakfast, lunch and dinner. So John needs counts for those. So that's why there's a ticket deadline. So if you haven't bought your tickets to the Chino event, get them now. Don't wait. The 13th is the deadline, and the 13th is, wow, look at that, just a few days away. So get your tickets soon. Then coming up at the end of July, I have an event in Washington, D.C. that Marcus and Just with Joe are putting on. I'll be talking with the sophiologist, Michael Martin, and Spencer Clavin. I've done one conversation with the sophiologist once. I certainly can't say I know him very well. And Spencer Clavin, I haven't had any interaction with all. So we'll probably do a randos conversation with Spencer before I do that event, just so that we can get a chance to know each other. So that's coming up in July. There are rumblings of an event in Europe next October that I will be coming out for. And some of those things are in the planning stage. And then there's chatter about February in Israel. I hear February in Israel is lovely. So those are some live events coming up. I did a terrific conversation with Manuel. His channel is pretty small, so it hasn't gotten a lot of views. I will be reposting that sometime soon. As you can see, I've been putting out a lot of content. I struggle with just how much content I should put through my pipe. Ooh, Grim Grizz has savings throw. Survival 12, Socialist 13, Wisdom 2. Oh, I'm about to colonize y'all's wisdom faculties. Heart 14. So I guess it's going to be cold and dry. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming through. I continue to try to put out content regularly about what I'm thinking about, which is sort of my monologue commentary videos, and then the convos, the conversations. If you haven't watched I thought this week's marriage crisis conversation went very, very well. Maybe I should put myself in a bigger picture. So if you haven't watched that, I've been playing with AI picture creators. As you can see from the thumbnails, I've shaken up the thumbnail tradition. The thumbnail tradition's been rock solid for 5 years, and I'm playing with something else. That's pretty typical for me. I get antsy and I play with things. And so I've been having some fun playing with Midjourney and DALL-E. And yeah, so that's sort of what's been going on. All right, let's see who's in the room here. We have Grail Country. I have not watched that, but Gilchrist, I've got kind of a backlog of videos to watch. I'm right now munching on The Rest is History on Coronation, because of course there's a coronation coming up this Saturday, and it's a very big deal. I think Tom Holland has it right that this is one of those moments where you can coronations are sort of a measuring stick that you dip into the river of the flow of time, and you can notice things by them. So plus 10 wisdom save Nate. Yes. Would you consider the principalities and powers equivalent to Tolkien's Valar? Yeah. Oh, questions. Already doing questions. Do I have to post my question on the Discord? Yes, you have to post it on the Discord. If there is time after I do the Discord questions, then I might look in the chat here. So don't forget the Hell video. Yeah, Phoebus liked the Hell video over at it wasn't at Grail Country. It was on a different channel. It's the morning show, MOURNING. So I should maybe, we'll see. So my Friday routines are usually I do this thing. I have to work with Pete to make sure that some Sunday details are ready. I have to do my rough draft. I have to get my sermon ready for a rough draft. I did that this morning already. So the sermon is probably rough draft quality worth right now. There are various things come up on Friday. Sometimes I visit people on Fridays, and then I try to record a video on Friday for Monday, so that Monday morning homeroom has a little bit of content. So, all right. So let's dive into the questions from the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. And there will be a link to that. There should be a link to that in the notes. I can drop a link to that here. Copy, paste, bang. There's the link, and now I can pin it. Oh, I'm just so impressed with myself. I'm learning all these things. Here we go. Alex Kairos asks, how does the response to turn these stones into bread relate to the multiplication of loaves and fishes? Man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. And yet, behold, the crowd was fed with more than just a sermon. Is this a way of sorting the center from the fringes? Jesus' parables are often enactments of his preaching, his announcement of the presence of the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, eternal life, bread of life. And so, again, I recommend C.S. Lewis's book, Miracles. I think that's a tremendously helpful book for moderns who are trying to figure out what on earth is going on in the Bible. And there are many interpretations of the loaves and fishes that have to deal with fulfillment of Old Testament property, where the reaper outdistances the sower. So magnificent and rich will the harvest be. So I think the point, even though bread is common to both, the point of Jesus turning down Satan in terms of the deliberate use of miraculous power for his own comfort, that's pretty clearly what's going on in the temptations and the fullness of the announcement of the kingdom enacted by the miracles. And again, I recommend read C.S. Lewis's book Miracles. I think that's very helpful for people. Part of the difficulty is that in the modern period, we tend to look at miracles as just sort of defiance of the natural or demonstration of the supernatural that isn't disconnected from the way ancients and medievals would view miracles, but it's there's a distortion that when we talk about one of the dualisms, which is sort of this nature supernature dualism, that sort of distorts our ability to understand what miracles are about. So, yeah, there are a lot there are a lot of books written about the Bible. I don't know if you knew that. There's been a lot of talk about the Bible for about 2,000 years. You can find, if you just Google it, you will find a lot of interpretation on that. I tend to look at the best interpretive lens to view Jesus through is the law and the prophets, the Old Testament. So that's usually a good first place to look. Hi, Paul from Peter P. This is more of a fun fact than a real question, but I think you might find it funny or at least interesting to know. But did you know that the German voice for Aslan in the Chronicles of Narnia, Thomas Fitch, is the same voice that's been used as Scar in The Lion King? Wow, that's interesting. Liam Neeson does it in the American version. So, and Scar in The Lion King is Jeremy Irons. So in the English version of the two, they're different actors. In the German version, well, I would imagine that the pool of I'm pleased. I mean, no disrespect. I would just imagine that the pool of voice actors for German versions of American movies is probably a little bit more restricted than for Americans in Hollywood. So, but that is a very interesting observation. Apparently, the casters thought that this particular actor has a very lionish voice, and so there you have it. Very interesting. And Dennis has something to say about that, about furries. So, okay. Al B looks like Bridges of Meaning Discord is doing commenting. They're answering their own questions in there. The reply is considered humorous because it plays with an unexpected twist in cultural reference to explain the connection between the two roles. The term furry refers to its subculture of people who are interested in anthropomorphic animals, often creating and wearing costumes resembling these characters. A closet furry would be someone who's secretly part of this subculture who has not publicly disclosed their interest. The humor lies in the unexpected leap from discussing the German voice actors' work to suggesting that their involvement in voicing two iconic lion characters might reveal a hidden personality interest. The comment is meant to be lighthearted and tongue-in-cheek, poking fun at the situation by imposing an amusing and somewhat absurd explanation. Thank you, Albie, for the commentary on the question. Christian Golden from New York. If humans knew they had the capacity to create AI that would somehow be able to experience true love, gratitude, etc., but would also be very high likelihood of causing the extinction of mankind, would it be unethical for them to refuse to develop that AI? Well, I would imagine it would be unethical. Well, I don't think it would be unethical to refuse any development of AI that would cause the extinction of mankind. That seems nearly the definition of ethical or unethical. The whole question of what does AI experience is, of course, one that I don't know that would ever be able to cross over, even between human beings, none of which have any question about whether or not we experience things like love, gratitude, etc. We don't know what other people's experiences are like. People try mightily to write poetry, write songs, make movies, explain all of these things to try to explain just what my experience is, my feeling experience. So, right now, I am talking to you. I've got this computer down here on the floor in front of me. And how do I know what it experiences? We have dogs and cats. How do we know what they experience? The Wittgenstein comment about, if a lion could speak English, would we understand the lion, just because the frame of reference question. So this whole conversation about computers having consciousness, if you go back to the Thunder Bay Conference of Consciousness and Conscience, part of what I talked to John Vervaeke about is this whole question of the how do we recognize consciousness in others? And this remains a difficult question for human beings, because the only way that we can the only way we know about consciousness in others is some direct observation of what seems to be behavior that is similar to consciousness in us. We can look at dogs and cats. Rupert Sheldrake, um, interestingly enough, asked the question, does the sun have consciousness? And again, with computers, what on earth are we talking about? We find it very difficult thing to understand what we mean by consciousness. So then this experience of is just right there. Then goes ear. You've mentioned before how the Bible is not a rule book. Can you flesh out what you mean by this? Ooh, this is a big one. Rules are a way of understanding, engaging reality. They're a very effective way. They're a very common way. The Bible has many laws in it. If you look at one description of, for example, the Old Testament, the law and the prophets, the Torah, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, are often called the law. And they're called the law not because it's just simply a law book, but there's narrative, there's poetry, there's song, and there's a fair amount. There's a census. Look at the Book of Numbers, and there are a lot of laws and rules in it. If you look at John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, I think he does a fairly good treatment of why rule-based systems are limited. Rules beget more rules. So you shall not murder. Okay, but then suddenly you're going to have all kinds of rules about murder. I did a conversation that is still subject to question whether or not we'll post it, a conversation about MAID, medical assistance in dying in Canada. I did a conversation yesterday. And if you dig into the rules, government procedures, there's rules beget rules. So who can apply to this program? What does it mean? And it's all based on the changing of a laws that said, for example, if doctors would intentionally prescribe certain drugs to end a life, doctors could be subject to criminal trials. So rules are a big thing. Now, let's think about a relationship. Let's think about a marriage relationship. Generally speaking, in a marriage relationship, one of the deep rules in the marriage relationship is um, don't have sex out of your circle of two. There's a rule. Um, and then, of course, you can go into Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky, and say, well, what do you mean by sex? What do you mean by is? On and on and on and on and on. And this is part of what people have long recognized about rules. And so therefore we have conversations about the spirit of the law and who is Carla Derlin? Does someone need to let's put the user on a timeout. Let's do that. Oh. Should I have not put her on a timeout? I don't know. We'll just put her on a timeout. She'll be back from the timeout. Didn't ban her. You tend to see, okay, so good example of this right here. Google tries to have, in some ways, rule-based moderation. One of the differences between, let's say, rule-based systems and what we're often talking about when we talk about AI is we're talking about machine learning. And what machine learning is about is the realization that simple rules. One rule might be anybody who puts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 emojis in a comment is likely a bot or a troll. And so we sort of have this rule. It's like this heuristic that's in our mind. And so when I saw all those emojis, I thought, and I see multiple messages from this Carla Derlin just coming in fast. Through my experience, I've known that often this leads to bot type behavior. And so then we quickly sort of move it away. But Karla Derland might be a real human being who watched this morning's video and is trying to engage in a conversation during the live stream, trying to make friends and influence people. How do I know that? I don't. So we have these rule-based systems, and they have a certain clarity to them. They have a certain power to them, but they also have a certain limit to them. And you see this even in stories in the Old Testament. So you have these rules. You shall not murder. Did David murder Uriah, the Hittite, the husband of Bathsheba? Well, he didn't walk over and stick a knife in him. And I didn't finish getting dressed this morning, apparently. They have these extra buttons on my shirt that just sort of want to be buttoned. So did David murder Uriah? Well, it depends. Well, does murder only mean you yourself stick a knife in, or does murder mean that you tell your general to pull back so that Uriah is killed by the enemy during a siege? Most of us would say David murdered Uriah. Okay. The penalty for murder is death. Okay. So David should die for what he did in this incident with Bathsheba and Uriah. Okay. Adultery. Dennis Prager's, I'd love to hear from some of my Jewish friends about Dennis Prager's comment about capital punishment in the Mosaic Code. That was very interesting. Anyway, why isn't David killed by God for murdering Uriah? Seems to be a violation of the rules. David also famously eats of the showbread when he's fleeing from Saul, something that's picked up. Obviously a point of conversation. There's a rule that David broke. Okay. So the Bible has plenty of rules in it. Rules are really helpful things. The 10 Commandments is a great set of rules, and all of that is true, but it's not the only thing that can be said. There are levels of interaction with the Bible based on people's knowledge of the Bible, people's developmental levels. Many people sort of approach the Bible as this is the cutoff for whether or not your afterlife is going to be good or bad. This is very low resolution. And so the Bible is a book of rules, And if you obey the rules, you'll have a good afterlife experience. And if you violate the rules, you'll have a bad afterlife experience. Very basic. Is there, well, Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. The New Testament consistently sees a final judgment based on people's actions. Those two things, they're right there in the Bible. What I often mean by the Bible is not just a set of rules, is that it's way more than a set of rules, because with all rules, there's context. And we again see this with respect to the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, which is something that the Bible also talks about. When you look at the book of Romans, which I'm going through in my Romans adult Bible study that I'm also posting on this channel as well as in the church channel, the Apostle Paul notes that the law, and he's, I think, mostly talking about the Mosaic Code, rebellion wells up in his heart and twists the law to become something against the spirit of the law. So, for example, you can have a rule that is intended to achieve a good outcome. And what people do sometimes with laws that are intended to achieve good outcomes is that they turn it around for bad outcomes. For example, many of you saw that this week we just redid the parking lot. Well, so nice couple inches of new asphalt was put down on the parking lot, everything smoothed out, and then the asphalt company comes in and stripes the parking lot, puts in those nice lines so people know where to park. And part of what they do is they come in and they say, well, here's code with respect to handicap parking. And the parking lines that we had were not up to code, and the parking signs that we had were not up to code. And so what the paving company did was bring our handicap parking spaces up to code, because that code continues to evolve. Many of you know that there are people around the United States that, using the American with Disabilities Act, regularly go into public places and look for code violations and initiate a lawsuit. And on one hand, ostensibly, that lawsuit is a good thing because it encourages places to keep up with code with respect to disability access. That's a good thing. But everybody also knows that it's also sort of a scam. This person has weaponized the law for their own enjoyment and their own wealth. It's not that they just decided to go to a church and wanted to visit the church. They're going into churches and restaurants and theaters and everything for the sole purpose of making money based on this law. And if such a person had done such a thing and noted that we didn't have enough handicapped spaces and our signage was substandard, such a person could come and probably sue Living Stones out of existence, because it wouldn't take a very big lawsuit to sue Living Stones out of existence. There's a great example of how the law can be corrupted. The intention of the law is that public businesses would have reasonable access for handicapped persons so that they could participate to one degree or another, as well as anyone else. And so, for the most part, we're in great shape with respect to this. Our doorways are wide, bathrooms have plenty of space, and now our parking lot has the proper number of spaces and the proper striping and the proper signage. Everything's good. But here's the problem with rules. And so many people rather dismissively approach the Bible and say, the Bible is a silly set of rules. Then they'll do something like go through every rule of the Bible and say, these rules are dumb and these rules are okay. Part of this is obviously a function of the long conversation between Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism. And part of what's been a real joy for me over the last few years is to build relationships and friendships with Jewish, with people who know a lot about Judaism, and to sort of get a sense of a rule-based system, and then this other Christian system that has evolved. But generally speaking, as a Christian minister, people will often walk in the door and they'll say, well, I think Christianity is dumb because you have rules against such and such. Oh, okay. And then it's easy for me to say the Bible isn't just a set of rules. And in fact, when we get to the conference, my opening speech is going to be about the quest for a spiritual home, because I think in many ways, one way to read the Bible is to see it as a quest for a spiritual home. That's what, in many ways, the whole book is about. Are there rules in it? Yes. Are rules important? Yes. When my children were small, we would make rules. The most famous, unusual rule in our household that I enforced, my adult children still laugh about it, that I enforced regularly, was no door games. And you might wonder, what are door games? Well, what happens with little kids, and we had 5 of them, is that when they're playing together, they'll start chasing each other around, which is fine, and they'll get a little rough and tumble, which is fine, but inevitably someone will decide they are going to, a version of the game is to run into a bedroom and slam the door and hold the door so that their brother or sister can't get at them. They'll do the same thing with car doors. What happens in games like that? Little fingers get trapped indoors, because if the timing isn't right, one kid gets a hand in the door and the other slams the door, and then we've got crying. And then we've got bruised and swollen fingers. Fortunately, we had no broken fingers in all of the years my kids were growing up, because the minute I saw it heading for a door, I said, no door games. And so just recently, my young adult children were roughhousing a little bit, and one ran behind a door to do that, and the other one said, no door games. And in other words, what they did was they employed the rule to tell their sibling, don't use the trick of running into the room and closing the door. So he used the rule, my rule, as a way of playing the game. And that, again, is a great illustration of the limitation of rules. And so when I say the Bible is more than just a book of rules, that's what I mean. That there are rules in it, and rules are good, but there's almost always more to it than rules. For example, if, let's say, my wife was to open the door one evening and she very quickly realized that the person on the other side of the door had ill intent, I would want her to slam the door, notwithstanding any fingers that might come in. Why? Because the no door games would be, you'd set that rule apart so my wife could slam the door for safety reasons. There's an example. So hence, yeah, rules make games fun. That's right. You don't have games without rules. We have the same rule. Strange theology. He says we have the same rule in our house: no doors. I think if you see, and once you have rules, then you suddenly have to adjust them. No door games. So yeah, rules make games fun. You can't have games without rules. Without rules, basketball doesn't work. So the point isn't that rules are bad. The point isn't that the Bible doesn't have rules. The point is rules are live within a context, and it's all part of understanding it. So, all right, there's that question. Michigan Sam, what do you think of when you hear home? Is it ultimately idolatry to find home in something other than the life to come? Looking for my water bottle. There it is. What's the difference between a sacrament and an idol, or an icon and an idol? A sacrament is a sign and seal. It's a connection between the holy thing and us. So a sacrament connects us. An icon points to something. All earthly homes point to the fulfillment, which is the life of the age to come. So in that sense, it's not an idol. Can homes be turned into an idol? Yes. In the same way, sacraments can be turned into idols and icons can be turned into idols. They are turned into idols when they no longer point or no longer connect, but instead substitute for. That's probably the briefest way to answer that question. Why are we so prone to idolatry? The reason for that is our inability to trust, because the genuine article is always given. It cannot be possessed by us. It cannot be wielded by us. It cannot be held captive by us. It cannot be employed to use against our God. What that means is that all of life has to be lived by faith, because the heart of idolatry is right there in Genesis 3. We don't trust God, we trust ourselves. And that's why I say my shorthand definition of Christianity is a Christian is someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. Maybe I'll try to give short answers today. I don't know. Maybe you'll complain about that. All right. Pete K. Strange Theology. What program are you using to add AI to your thumbnails? Sometimes I use DALL-E and sometimes I use Midjourney. I am by no means an expert in either. DALL-E, which is bing.com/create, it does a pretty good job. Midjourney, you have to pay like $10 a month for. It uses Discord. It's not anywhere near as elegant as DALL-E, but it is a little bit more powerful. So I've mentioned a number of times my older sister also has a YouTube channel. My older sister is an artist and a musician. And so the degree that she and I share some heritable factors like openness, she's even more open than I am. I'm probably a bit more conscientious than she is. So she's super high in openness, and every time Jordan Peterson talks about really creative people have difficulty monetizing, that's my sister. She'll do something for a while and get bored with it and want to do something else, and the difficulty is that she doesn't stay with anything long enough to really make much money at it. So she's done photography, she's done music, she's done all kinds of things, she's done art, all kinds of things in her life. So when I got going with YouTube, I encouraged her to start playing around with it. And she's done a whole variety of things with YouTube. She owns a house in Connecticut. And not too long after the channel started, I did a little retreat in her house with about a dozen people. And we sat around for 2 days and just had conversation. It was a great 2 days. Then COVID hit, so I haven't done it again, but I really want to do it again. So that was great fun. But she and her husband were fixing up their house, so they made little videos of that. And then she was doing decorating, so she did videos of that. And then she was sort of in primitive style decorating. She did videos of that. And then lately she's been playing around more with music and sound and videos with that. And so she then got into, she was always using Photoshop to work with pictures. And so now she's gotten into AI to work with photographs. And I watch her do this. It's like, I wonder if I could play around with that. And so my sister and I were just always sort of swapping ideas back and forth and sharing tools. And so I started playing with it. And so I've been using Midjourney for a lot of these things. I'm by no means an expert at it. Anybody who's watched my creation of thumbnails over the last number of years knows I don't want to spend more than 10 or 15 minutes on a thumbnail. If you're really doing well in your thumbnail game, you can spend a lot of time. I don't have Photoshop skills. So and also often after I make a video, I have sort of an implicit sense of what the video is about. And so then to play around with these graphics AI search engines lets me sort of play around with those ideas. So yeah, so that's what I'm using. It's been fun. How long will I do it? I have no idea. When I first started this channel, I told people right of the way, how long will I do this channel? I have no idea, because my sister has a very fast cycle in that she can be done with something within a year or two, and she's just done with it and she won't go back. I have a little bit of slower cycle. I've been doing this for 5, 6 years now. Part of the reason I think she was able to stick with YouTube longer and I've been able to stick with YouTube longer is just that it's so full of people and you all keep it fresh. So, and I'm a very selfish YouTuber. I am a completely selfish YouTuber in that, very good YouTubers edit their videos. They make nice videos. They have concise themes. It's well put together. It comes to a point. You don't have to sit and listen to me ramble for a couple hours. So all of you who continue with this channel are just, this is what you like. So we found each other. It's a good thing. So yeah, but I said right from the start, and I'll say it again, there could be a day that I just get to a point and I'm done. And then I'm done. And then there's no more videos. Will that day come? I don't know. Might it come? Absolutely. The thing that keeps me into the videos is because y'all are interesting people. And I know that frustrates some people because I find interest where a lot of people find annoyance. I find interest in people that are strange, obnoxious, rude. And that's part of the reason I hang in there with people that many of you give up on almost right away. And I hang in there because it's like, well, I wonder what makes them like that. And eventually you get to the bottom. You say, okay, they're just incurably annoying or a jerk. So at some point I'll lose interest, but I don't know. That's kind of the way it goes. David Walker. To those who have more will be given. To those who have little, even more will be taken. Even the little they have will be taken away. Maybe not an exact quote. However, I wanted to ask if you would find yourself with less. Is there a way to beat having more from being taken? Or are you fatalist about it? I don't mean fatalistic as a pejorative by any ways. My question stands. Okay, let's talk about this. That, as Peterson calls a Matthew principle, that phrase is, in a sense, a proverb. All proverbs are generalizations. So take those proverbs and set them next to the Beatitudes of Matthew 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. All proverbs are generalizations that are not rules, like eternal rules or laws or anything. The poor get poorer. Yes. The rich get richer. Yes. Jesus is basically making an observation, but Jesus also basically says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so while it's true that poverty tends to lead to more poverty, it's really, how can I say this? Jesus, if you understand what Old Testament wisdom literature is, and you listen to Jesus trades in a fair amount of wisdom literature within his teaching. Now, this gets tricky because sometimes people are like, well, he's the Son of God, so when Jesus says something, it should be a rule. Well, it depends if he means it to be a rule. When Jesus says the poor you will always have with you, Jesus isn't saying, oh, let's go out and impoverish people. He's just making an observation about the way this world works. You find those observations about Jesus all over the place. A lot of it should be taken in the sense of wisdom literature. It's not a rule. So if you have little, strive for more. Ask. So on one hand, he says this, then he says, ask and you will be given, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. So, and everybody who asks receives. So on one hand, you have this, and on the other hand, Jesus says, seek and you shall find. So if you are dissatisfied with your lot of having little and fear of having even less, ask for more, pursue more. And Seek ye first the kingdom of God. And all these things, what does he mean? All these things. Read the rest of the context of the Sermon on the Mount. All of these things will be added to you. Jesus says, it is tougher for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through an eye of needle. It's like, rich must be out. But then again, Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, many rich people clearly have a part in the kingdom of heaven. As I mentioned in my adult Sunday school class, often when you look at Abraham and Jacob and Job, wealth and prosperity is a sign of divine favor. But you can't push that too hard because, again, you see the book of Job. So all of these things are in there. And that's, again, part of my pushback. And the Bible is not a book of rules. Okay, here's a rule. Those who have, more will be given to them. Those who don't have, even what the little they have will be taken away from them. It isn't a sense of this is a rule, you're stuck there. Because there's other proverbs to say that say, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be open. So, and even to something like, I've used this apocryphal story before. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but someone goes up to Augustine, who in many ways is the father of a very strong predestinarian theology. And Augustine, I fear I'm not elect. And he says, go to a church and get elect. So there's that kind of flexibility in all of this. And I think actually there are dozens of things in my head I want to make a video about. One of them is Dennis Prager's comment about capital punishment in the Mosaic Code. I found that to be a super interesting comment. And I should make a video about it because I would really like to get some feedback on it. And we're talking about AI, and in some ways, my entire YouTube channel has just been a thinly veiled attempt to not create artificial intelligence, but rather to use YouTube's artificial intelligence to connect me to other intelligences, which is you, the audience. Because in many ways, the purpose of a lot of my rambling, nonsensical videos is to throw it out there and read the comments. And especially when I have regular commenters, then I already sort of have a sense of who you are and what you're doing with it. And then it's like, oh, I just keep learning. As Grim Grizz says, we have the hive mind. So last night I popped into Grim Grizz's stream and I started about doing a Thief in the Night stream. And, usually in the evening, I'm spending the evening with my wife, but she was tired and she said, oh, I'm going to bed. So she went to bed early. So I was watching some YouTubes, and then interactive YouTubes are way more fun than just watching a video, no matter how slickly produced. So of course I go to Grim Grizz and he's doing all of the insanity that Grim Grizz does. And then Grim Grizz isn't going to do it for more than a half hour or so. So then I thought, oh, maybe I'll start a live stream. And then someone said, oh, Jacob's already got a live stream going. Okay, so maybe I'd go over to Jacob's live stream. And then my wife came out of bed and she said, I can't get to sleep. So then it was okay. Now I'm not gonna pay attention to Grim Grizz or Jacob. I'm gonna pay attention to my wife. She's my wife. Part of what you promise in your marriage vows is you pay attention to your wife. So shut up the computer, pay attention to your wife. So that's what happened. That's why I didn't do a live stream last night. But again, all this entire channel is a thinly veiled excuse to mine all of you for your ideas and your thoughts and the incredible chaotic jumble of people that all of you are. And of course, the channel has grown way beyond my ability to see all of you. I mean, if I had 100 or 200 subscribers, it would be a lot easier. But here we are. All right. How do we ask tough theological questions to the church without sowing distrust? Oh, gosh. So the question is, how do we ask tough theological questions to the local church without sowing distrust in the leadership? Or do we abide and turn our questions to PVK Discord Q&A? So another one of the videos that has not been made yet is a video on some of this book, The Doctrine of Reprobation, the Christian Reformed Church by Harry R. Bohr. Harry Bohr was, so in the Christian Reformed Church, as in many churches in the United States, You had a generation who went and fought World War II. And that deeply transformed the Christian Reformed Church. Before the Second World War, the Christian Reformed Church was a enclave of Dutch immigrant churches isolated from the American mainline. And what the Second World War did was pull all of these young men out of the dairy farms of the Christian Reformed Church all over America into the Army and the Navy. I believe Harry Bohr was in the Navy. Spoolhoff, who would become the longtime president of Calvin College, was basically in the precursor to the CIA. What do you think of that, Grizz? What do you think of that, Jacob? Maybe I'm the one who's put here by the three-letter agencies. Harry Bohr went into the military. After the military. Also, you had the practice in the Christian Reformed Church that the Christian Reformed Church in many ways was an extension of the Dutch church. And the CRC was constantly looking back to the Netherlands as an immigrant church. Even into the 50s and 60s, some of the really smart young Christian Reformed young people who got good grades would go to the Free University in the Netherlands to get their advanced theological education. They wouldn't go to educational institutions in the United States. They'd go to the Free University. Then what was going on in the Netherlands church would continue to sort of set the pace for the Christian Reformed Church in North America, and that way was distinct from the Reformed Church in America. Harry Bohr was one of these guys. He was in the military, I think he was in the Navy, and then he got a little more advanced theological education. He was theologically astute, and one of the paths that people would take was they would go to Nigeria and teach theology in Nigeria. So and some of these were some of my favorites in the CRC because, well, I did a similar thing. I went to the Dominican Republic after I left North America. I didn't just stay and say, get a PhD in theology from Princeton or Yale or Harvard, or didn't go to England like is the current fashion to St. Andrews or something like that. And he went and taught theology in Nigeria. But he had questions about, now I'm going to trigger a lot of things here. And in some ways, the points that Harry Bohr made in this book are still quite valid, which is why I want to talk about it on my channel. He basically said, this doctrine of reprobation really doesn't work on a number of levels. And it's right there in the Christian Reformed doctrine. And, you're subscribed to it through the form of subscription, which comes to us from the Synod of Dort, which has a very interesting history. And this should really be taken care of. And so he starts writing. And pretty much everybody ignores what he's doing because there's nothing to be gained from poking that bear. And until there was a controversy called the Love of God controversy set up by another seminary faculty member who asked the question, does God love only the elect, or does God so love the world? And what happened for the most part in the Christian Reformed Church was everybody said, look, I just saw Grail Country and Transfigured in the comments. So yeah, once I make this video, see, part of the reason I haven't made this video is because I know I'm going to go into Harry Bohr land if I make this video. And the timing of Christian Reformed ministers who talk about this stuff, it's usually after they retire because they won't take away your pension. And I know I'm already going to get in trouble for saying what I just said, but here it is. Harry basically said, okay, these are some of my thoughts. I want to have a theological conversation with the Christian Reformed Church with respect to reprobation. And the church kind of said, come on, Harry, we trust you. You're a good guy. We're not going to kick you out of the church, but we don't want to have this conversation because we don't know where this mess will lead. And so his entire career, he kind of stews on this thing. And then he retires. He moves back to North America in the late 70s. And basically in the early 80s basically goes to Senate and says, hey, you have this system, it doesn't work. And the church basically said, no, our system does work. And we're not going to change anything, but we're not going to discipline you or anything like that either, because you're a good guy and you're one of us. And so what do you do with that? What do you do with that? How do we ask tough theological questions to the local church without sowing distrust in the leadership? So in the Christian Reformed Church, he had to deal with basically he asked the tough theological questions to his local council, and they basically said, as they would imagine, they kicked it up to the denominational level, where the denomination could muster a study committee, and the study committee answered his questions. And so if you're curious about this, you can go through and you can read how the synodical committee defended reprobation and its place in the life of the church. So that's why when I make this video, I'm not going to get into the actual issue that Harry Bohr wanted to engage in, but rather the question of whether this gravamen system actually does work. And I have made videos about the gravamen. I'm sorry, it's Al Walters corrected me on CRC Voices. Gravamen. It says it comes from the Latin. He laid it all out for me. Sorry, Al. The gravamen. And so now the Christian Reformed Church is in a pickle, because on one hand, and this applies to Sam's situation too. On one hand, the church really doesn't want to monkey with its theological architecture too much, because that's probably going to hurt a lot of people and cause a lot of chaos. Every now and then an issue comes forward that, like the same-sex marriage issue, that there is some sophisticated theology that can be worked through on this. But unlike sort of a don't ask, don't tell policy around something like the doctrine of reprobation, same-sex marriage can't be quite so easily sidetracked. And so now suddenly the Christian Reformed Church has to figure out if this gravamen procedural machinery really works. And if you look at the Harry Bohr case, it raises a lot of question whether the thing can be worked at all. And so part of what's going to happen at Synod 2023, again, I think structurally the Christian Reformed Church is going to be conservative on the matter of same-sex marriage, but it's going to raise the issue, NTP, that you are asking here. And it's not just an issue in the Christian Reformed Church, it's an issue in many churches that use propositional theological categories to ostensibly demarcate their ecclesiastical boundaries. One way to go about this might be, okay, well, let's not use propositional theological assertions to demarcate our boundaries. Let's use procedural. So now all this for Vervaeke language is really handy. So let's shift from the propositional and go over to the procedural. Okay. Then you're sort of into the question of rules, because rules really get at procedures. Okay. How about the perspectival? Anybody who's paying attention to Vervaeke's 4 Ps and listens to my little shorthand definition, who is a Christian? Someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. That's perspectival and procedural. In other words, what you really need for a church is something that much more fully engages all 4 Ps. You can't just take out the propositional. I hear that put forward sometimes. It's like, that will not work. And the same-sex marriage debate is a great example, because it is really difficult for a community not to share in, let's say, a united sexual ethic or worldview. Sex is one of these things that can more quickly destroy a community and a family than anything else. Hence, thou shalt not commit adultery. That's a that's a biggie, and it's, even this whole polyamorous conversation. Well, if we all sit around as tables and agree and say, okay, honey, I don't mind if you sleep with so and so, but if you sleep with this other one, then so in other words, you can sleep with anyone you want as long as I sign off on it. Is that really going to work? So my answer to your question, NTP, is it requires wisdom. Part of the reason that I have not had my channel major on theological debate. Number one, there are many, 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 many YouTubes where all they want to do is wrangle about theological debate. Does that mean I don't enjoy it sometimes? No, I do enjoy it. And part of the reason why I find people like Sam or Jacob or even some even less savory characters in this little corner interesting is because I'm curious. I like to hear what they think. But I don't want to spend 3 hours on YouTube debating reprobation and election. I don't think it for the most. Number one, there are people that know the details of this better than I do, and I'd rather listen to them talk about it, quite frankly, if I'm that interested. And number two, the vast majority of Christians and non-Christians out there, I don't think the debates help them. It doesn't mean the debates aren't important. It's just I don't see the practice as tremendously helpful. It's fine having this stuff on YouTube, but actually having productive theological debate is really, really hard, partly because so much of this material is so old and the knowledge of it is so exhaustive that it's just on a technical level difficult to really have a good handle on the whole thing. Plus, it's so deep and so foundational, it reaches all over the place. And in my opinion, a better way to actually manage it is the way that normal people manage it, which is it's how you live. It's what you do, which is in fact how the New Testament manages it. As I said before, you're judged on what you do, not on the theological content that is within your head. Now, if you really think that through and you think about Tom Holland's thesis, this stuff is really hard. So that's why I see Anselman's in the comments. If you don't like a church's rules, just find a church that asks less of you. Yeah. And what's so funny about that, Joey, is that one good way to kill a church is to ask nothing of its people. And that's kind of why the mainline church is dying. And one of the reasons why I like Anselman around is the proposition and the propositional and the theological is always out there. So keep that as part of the conversation. But it's always got to remain part of the conversation, just like the 1P that is propositional is always part of the 4Ps, and they live together in this organic unity that is reality plus more P's potentially. So what to do? I think, and in an ideal world, you would go to the church that has all of the correct answers to all of the theological questions you might have. Do those answers necessarily mirror yours? No. What does that mean? Means we all need to have a little bit of humility about the content of our theological Rolodex. Boy, that word dates me. So have a little bit of humility. The question of where you should go to church is a complex one. On one hand, you should go to a church that helps you on your quest for a spiritual home. You should also go to a church that affords you the opportunity to serve the body of Christ and serve the community in general. You should also go to a church, if you're in a family, you should also go to a church that helps the quest for a spiritual home for your spouse and children if you have them. In other words, every church you go to will be a compromise. So when the same-sex marriage thing came, I had a bunch, because again, I have this visibility because of this silly YouTube channel that I started for my own selfish reasons. I had a number of people that came to me and basically said, I'm in a Christian Reformed church. 80-90% of my church are pretty conservative people. They don't read theological books. They don't even read much at all. They're just living their life, trying to love Jesus, be faithful members of the church, be good fathers and mothers and husbands. And they're all pretty much conservative on this issue. I'm not. Should I file a gravamen? I said, there's kind of two kinds of gravamens. There's the kind that you file and the kind that you keep with your mouth shut sometimes. Now, does that mean that if the pastor doesn't call you in and say, I'd really like to know what you think about this, that you shouldn't tell the pastor? No, you should tell the pastor. But hopefully you'll have the kind of relationship with the pastor that will understand that even if the practice of the Christian Reformed Church has some issues with it, like Harry Bohr mentions, there's also a certain amount of wisdom in the way the Christian Reformed Church has managed its confessional issues. Because if you decide you are going to draw real bright theological lines, the church could wind up spending an inordinate amount of time focusing on propositional correctness and, in many ways, the weightier issues of the faith, such as obedience, service, love, get ignored. And this has been a real issue in the Christian Reformed Church. So, and again, in an ideal church, it would all work. And okay, ortho bros can say, it works for us. Okay, fine. I'm happy for you. This is my tribe. These are my people. I love them. I'm a part of them. And as long as there's a them there, I think I'll be one of them. They're my family. And so I will do what I can to help us all be a better church and better Christians. And it requires wisdom. NTP, the above question rose while watching JFK Jr. on ABC News interview when he said that science is constantly shifting and he doesn't trust authority. I watched that too. Sounds like a difficult spot for a Catholic. Well, and so this is the Christian Reformed Church. It's this tiny little North American denomination that's dying, and God bless us. Living Stones is very Christian Reformed. It's like, gosh, we just built a parking lot. What will God do with us? I don't know, but we will do our best to be faithful to him in the ways that we can until we don't have any more breath to give. Roman Catholic Church, oh my goodness. Massive. Can't even begin to think about it. So, yeah, you're a Kennedy. The most famous Kennedy was a sex addict in the White House, who also was a World War II hero. Who, was he a good president? Had some good things about him. He was sort of a monarch. I mean, they called it Camelot, and he kind of acted like a king. It was good to be king for JFK. And of course, RFK, his brother, Attorney General, assassinated during his presidential campaign, same year that Dr. King was assassinated, and now his son. So I don't know a lot about RFK, but he's plucky. I like plucky. So good for you to stand up and tell the world what you think. Science is always shifting. Theology shifts a lot less by design, and that's a good thing. So, because religion and theology is deeper and lower, it has to be more stable. Science, follow the science. You'll be running around all over the place. Which science? What do you mean by science? So, great question. Thanks for asking it. Is Martin Luther King Jr. a Protestant saint? Yeah, it's that's the best way to think about how he functions in the American Protestant ecosystem. Will he ever be canonized by the Roman Catholic Church? Nope. Did he have an adultery problem? Yep. Did he help the United States manage the elimination of Jim Crow without a second civil war? Yep. Boy, that's a good thing. He was liberal neo-Orthodox in terms of his theological orientation, and how that worked in a very conservative Southern Black community. Fascinating. It's in some ways, well, if you are martyred young, and I almost it's difficult to be an old martyr. It's a little easier to be a young martyr because your resume is that much shorter. What would have happened in terms of his criticism of the Vietnam War with respect to his relationship with the White House? Interesting question. But he's an American saint. He's a saint of American civil religion. He's very much a mainline saint, because in many ways the main line was completely transformed by Martin Luther King Jr. So it's fascinating. Are Unitarians Protestant or even Christian? Unitarians, by definition, are deficient in the Trinity. So I would say they're a Christian heresy. Sam would say Trinitarians are a Christian heresy. So there's the conversation. Is Sam Protestant? Yes. Are Unitarian Universalists Protestant? They're very different from Sam. Yes. The Unitarian Universalists are heirs, as Sam continually reminds us, of the New England Puritans and the Transcendentalists that came through, Thoreau, Emerson. It's sort of a quintessential American religion. Are they part of the Christian? Are they downstream from Christianity? Absolutely. So are Marxists. So are capitalists. So is the Enlightenment. Depends on what you're asking when you say, or even Christian. They're not Trinitarian. The Athanasian Creed has some pretty strong words about it. So I'll leave it there for you. Anyone who adheres to the Apostles' Creed and has faith in Jesus Christ is a Christian, if you're asking my opinion. Michigan man Sam gives that. Is the Apostles' Creed Trinitarian? He's very generous. All right. I did not plant this question. I know you did not. I want to see the Pope arm wrestle Cyril to decide who gets to select the next emperor. See, I don't turn off the live chat. I think it's fun. I just have to not pay too close attention to it. All right, let's keep going. Oh boy, we've got more questions today. How are we doing on time? What time did I? Oh gosh, 45 minutes left. Short answers. All right. I'm a bit obsessed with Luke 3. There's a lot packed into it. We'll let that start. One related question: will reenchantment lead to repentance? Hard to be definitive on this, I guess, but I'd appreciate your thoughts. Logos Bible Software. Close all. Luke 3:1. John the Baptist prepares the way. Baptism and genealogy of Jesus. Starts with Jesus, goes all the way back to Son of Adam, Son of God. Will reenchantment lead to repentance? If you understand repentance to be a turning away from sin and a turning towards God, I would say not necessarily. One of the people, like, I don't like going after authors, but one of the people that I'm thinking about having a conversation with is Clay Rutledge. Paul Anleitner had him on. I really liked his conversation with Jordan Peterson. John Vervaeke regularly talks about nostalgia as sort of a dirty word, and I understand what John is saying. But Clay Rutledge has made, I think, some really helpful contributions towards nostalgia. Nostalgia is sort of mining the past for meaning. Now, the idolatry question sort of applies here, because you can treat nostalgia idolatrously, and I think that's exactly what John Vervaeke is talking about, is sort of an idolatrous application of nostalgia. But I think there's also an appropriate application of nostalgia, which is to mine the meaning in our past, in our histories. So, and in that way, we're not as disenchanted as we usually think we are. And people who are not necessarily overly thinky-talky, as has been noted many times, once they leave an organized religion, they just sort of invest themselves in a disorganized religion, which usually has a fair amount of nostalgia in it. And part of why the United States is so Christ haunted is because we've got so much Christianity around us and within us that the nostalgia sort of keeps it alive. The easiest way to answer this question is, before this pervasive modernist style disenchantment, the world was plenty pagan. And I think with a significant wave of reenchantment, I don't think it necessarily leads us back into Christendom. I think Christendom is a function of institutional structures. Part of what made Western Europe so unique, and I don't know a lot about the Christendom in Orthodox nations. I mean, and part of the difficulty of that was the Iron Curtain shut my generation out from a lot of the history. And, Orthodoxy has had a kind of bad run since Islam. A lot of the Eastern Christian world, if you look at the Ottoman Empire and the Islamic conquests, that ate up a lot of Christianity that was Eastern oriented. And so then a lot of it that wasn't sort of eaten up was then behind the Iron Curtain. So it's interesting watching a little bit of a renaissance in Eastern Christianity in the West right now, and it'll be very interesting to see where that goes. But part of what made Christendom so interesting in Western Europe, in Latin Christianity, was that you had a pope. And so you had a monolithic figure and energy that sort of held the thing together. And that then made interesting tensions between civil. I'm listening. I'm going through the rest is history right now, and coronations, and it's just fascinating. That, one of the things that the papacy was always wrestling with was how do we handle European kings? And of course, Henry VIII does a number on them, but he was by no means the first European monarch to do a number on them by any means. I mean, Gallicanism. If you read the book Vatican I, heavy tensions between Ultramontanism, which is like a strong vision of papal supremacy and authority, versus Gallicanism and Josephism. Not Joseph of Arimathea, not Joseph, the husband of Mary, but Joseph, the Emperor of Austria. you had this tension between monarchs who, in a sense, were religious figures over their nations and the Bishop of Rome. So the West has all that really interesting history. And then, reading Kierkegaard and thinking about that, he makes mention in some of the videos this week. Kierkegaard just really deeply questions the viability of a Christendom. So will a new wave of enchantment sort of revive Christendom? What form? I mean, part of what's different is that nation states now are very different from, let's say, another great The Rest is History episode, 1848, this year of revolutions that didn't really have revolutions. It's a good question. I don't think, I think it'll just continue to bring new things. Do you think some estuaries should incorporate Vervaeke's practices, such as the one we see in After Socrates, episode 10, with John Vervaeke, Christopher Mastro Prieto? I haven't watched that one. Maybe I should. So estuary is, again, the estuary protocol is sort of a really nice, neat handle to help a group of often strangers develop an ad hoc conversation that can be satisfying and enjoyable and meaningful. This last Wednesday night, I visited Josiah's, the other Sacramento estuary that we had at Hop Garden in Midtown, and a lot of the same regulars that come to my Livingstone's Sacramento estuary. Raj was there, and Raj is just an estuary thoroughbred. Great conversation. It was just so much fun. But estuary is a very lightweight tool that can be used for a variety of different purposes. I don't know what to think about circling. I just don't. I Mencius Molebugs, Curtis Yarvin's, he went after Kai Sengstock in his blog a few years ago. You can Google that. And, in some ways, circling very much attempts to address the intimacy crisis. But intimacy is varied. As a male Christian, I have different levels of intimacy with different people and in different ways. So I have a degree of intimacy with my wife, with my children, with my mother and my sister, with my church. So all that is modulated. And I've never been in for a circling session, so I'll have to see it, because I've always kind of wondered. But I did read Curtis Yarvin, although it was a very long blog. He obviously wasn't happy with his experience with circling, but I don't know enough about it. So I'll have to watch After Socrates episode 10. Estuary for me is not intended to be an organization. The estuary. When I first said estuary, a lot of people wanted me to establish Estuary Inc. And for those who haven't noticed, I have completely refused to do so. I think estuary is a practice that different groups can use towards different outcomes. And I think from a Christian point of view and a church point of view, I think it's a great potential tool for churches to better connect with their community and to build relationships with people who aren't necessarily going to church. But people are using the estuary protocol and some of these ideas for all kinds of different reasons, and I'm okay with that. Yosef, greatly enjoyed this week's content. Thank you. The quest for authenticity in the 1960s was itself a response to new research on compliance, conformity, social influence, and the discovery of validation, and why we seek it in the wake of post-World War II, early Cold War research. The pendulum has once again swung back, as you point out in your video this week, from conformity to authenticity to social validation, and most likely, in the face of AI and all the fake personas we will face, We will all swing back to authenticity 2.0, as we already are seeing in this little corner. If the death of God once challenged us to find a source of authority and questioned whether humans could fill that gap, now his death challenges us to find someone who deeply cares about us and validates our existence. It's bang on there, Yosef. And we question whether algorithms or even today's humans can fill this place. But the religious aren't free of this either. You're absolutely right. It's easy to dismiss this as a new golden calf. But does this merit smashing the tablets? Or do we, the religious, need a different approach to having a relationship with God and communicating that in light of the nation's ill preparedness for the relationship we tried to offer first? Is authenticity 2.0 the answer, or do we aim to transcend the cycle with more transjective solutions where God and man are co-creators of the new tablets? Yes, hot, 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 hot. That there has always been a degree of co-creation in the Bible. You see it right at the beginning with the gardening. You know, the Lord brings the animals to Adam to name. You know, or were they garden? What is an? Are they? Where was Adam? Were Adam and Eve arborists more than gardeners? Because they seem to have a lot of fruit trees. So let's say arborists. Gardening or being an arborist it's sort of like being a doctor in that you can't make the tree grow. You just tinker around the edges to try and have it deliver, to try and have it reach the potential of its glory. And I think that's sort of a good way to think about going forward. I'm gonna avoid language about new tablets because that my consciousness Congress is lighting up with various characters out there that are gonna find language of new tablets sputting. So collaboration is maybe a way of understanding co-creation. That's good, Kale. I agree with that. Anselman says Adam did not give qualities to the animals until he started selective breeding. And I think that's, just look at, there's YouTube out there of domesticating foxes. And it's wild because the foxes, they're just like with dogs. You have a wolf, you have this big long snout and the noses get shorter, and domesticate. We've done this. And I think that's the story of the world, and it's right there in the Bible. And I think the process continues. Urban cities are, in a sense, gardening communities. That's what they are. So great question. Great quote. Thanks, Joseph. Really good. Is man manifester of God through revealed covenant keeping and dogma, or does he lower God to become panentheist, co-creator with technological simulacra of God? That's complicated. Could panentheism be an attempt to fix the deist architect that elevates man to the completer of God's work by lowering God a bit less via science and process sophistry? Is this false humility and submission? Gosh, what a list of questions. Are non-theism, post-Platonic throwing out revealed dogma, then gaslighting its adherents to the certainty of their so-called faith? Is there a spirit that tempts man into the creator's role at play? Yes. Are these creators not aflame with the creation of new worship, discords, churches, religions, and clubs? Probably. Is the thesis that the religions must conform to this not implicit even when not stated? Perhaps. Head of advice of editing. Thank you, Dennis. So, putting these two questions together, I think it's clear that a big part of this is to get the balance right. The new heavens and the new earth float down from above in the book of Revelation. but they're in a degree of continuity with what we're doing. When the Apostle Paul says we labor not in vain, I think we should take that seriously. C.S. Lewis tries to imagine it in the last battle. And you have old Narnia and new Narnia. And I think, so Lewis's literary career is very interesting. So in many ways, Screwtape Letters was a breakout book. And Screwtape Letters was sort of an allegorized fiction that gives pastoral advice for the Christian life. That was a breakout book. It was a clever book. Pilgrim's Regress did less well, although thanks, I think it was Roger Marshall who was, prompted me to reread it, and I should get back to it. I got through about 2/3 of it again and really enjoyed it. Pilgrim's Regress is a book of Lewis's that doesn't get a lot of love, and for some valid reasons. It's a less mature Lewis who wrote Pilgrim's Regress, and it's just sort of a straight allegory, sort of following Bunyan. And then Lewis had his more straightforward apologetic works like The Abolition of Man and, one of my favorites, Miracles, The Problem with Pain. And Lewis, what a tremendous writer to write straightforward apologetics. I love his book, Miracles. I found it super helpful in many ways. But then Lewis abandons that sort of direct approach and starts writing children's books. And this, of course, everyone just sort of stops because what on earth does C.S. Lewis know about children? He doesn't even seem to particularly like them. And of course, children came into his life through Joy Davidman's sons, which that relationship wasn't always easy. It went better for one than for the other. For the younger, of course, and kids are different. But I think what moving towards children's literature afforded Lewis was sort of a discipline whereby he exhibited his gift of clarity and simplicity, and writing children's books sort of forced him into it. Yeah, I didn't mention the Space Trilogy. That's because I haven't read the Space Trilogy since I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, they were above my head. So I really do have to go back to them. So I like Lewis's The Last Battle on questions like this because we're dealing with collaboration, co-creation. Tolkien, of course, saw us as sub-creators. Figuring out the dance we do with God it's in some ways the whole game. So those are good questions. Now it's a call that's already edited. Oh my. Okay, Mert 52. How are we doing for time? We're doing all right. Thoughts on Jordan Peterson's tweets? I now have a chance to know people at a little deeper level, both on and off Twitter. What we say of Twitter that is true is really true of Twitter, and that it really accentuates certain aspects of one's personality. So Twitter will give you an insight into someone's personality, into their thoughts. And on Twitter, we see a side of Jordan that is not as kind, as thoughtful, and as careful as he can be. Gosh. Space Trilogy is overrated. Come at me, Luke. So when you see Twitter, Twitter is like a slide that a projector is shining on a wall. The projection of the person that you see through Twitter is by no means the whole person. Twitter is in some ways a distortion of the whole, but a window into the part. That's Jordan. And, so the whole idea of, now I'm not saying that these platforms don't have an obligation of stewardship. They certainly do. Maybe at some point the obligation of stewardship will mean the destruction of these platforms. I don't know. But it's helpful to know this side of Jordan. And, you want to, I'm going to, have this conference with Michael Martin, the sophiologist. And, Michael and Nate from Grail Country are, I assume, pretty tight. I mean, they're on each other's channels regularly. Nate sort of reacted strong to Jordan on Twitter, but I follow Michael on Twitter, and he's pretty Jordan-like when he's on Twitter. I don't hold that against him. There are tweets that, fortunately you can delete tweets. And so there are tweets that I have deleted because you tweet it and it's like, is it kind? Is it helpful? Now, it's okay to not necessarily be kind, but if you're not kind, you should at least be helpful in a productive way. And that's really hard. So, yeah, he's Jordan. And people get all upset about it. I mean, people are getting upset about text messages and things that are filmed in private. And these are all windows into people. But think about yourself. And, again, I love this pastoral sermon illustration. Imagine, it's not hard to imagine. Imagine Google is listening to everything I say whenever I carry my phone with me. And imagine that Google is recording this. And imagine that all of that recording is being transcribed. And imagine it's all searchable. And then at the end of my life, the King of Kings calls up Google and says, okay, Vanderclay, let's hear all of that. And imagine it's not only recording the things that I let slip out of my lips, but it's recording my thoughts. Who can stand, as the Bible says? So the irony with this is that it's eliciting a lot of self-righteousness. So, all right, you don't like the unkind, unloving, low resolution, reactive, political posturing you see some people do on Twitter. All right. What about self-righteousness? Judge not that you be not judged, because the same measure that you use on them will be used against you. So I'm not offended. Do you think it's a good thing he's on Twitter? Or do you think it's a bad thing he's on Twitter? I'm going to end the questions here. I think it's a good thing he's on Twitter. Twitter doesn't seem to give me a lot of his tweets because, of course, Twitter navigates mine, and my tweets are usually, my Twitter stream is usually filled with people that I'm interacting with more. And but it's Twitter. It's fine. More information, if received with wisdom, helpfully recalibrates your image of the person. I know many people in my life that are not on Twitter. If they were on Twitter, I think they'd probably be far worse than Jordan. They're still my friends. Do I want to have that window into their heart? Maybe it'd be helpful. Maybe it wouldn't. I'm not offended by what people put on Twitter. We shouldn't be so easily triggered. Gosh. Thoughts on how to properly read philosophical and theological works. If you must, with humility. It's really difficult. If you could go back in time and select the Christian tradition you were born into, which one? Oh, okay. I see what you're asking. Which one would you choose and why? Oh, I'm such a person of habit. I'm such a happy person. I like my church. I love my people. If I had to do it all over again, I'd be Christian Reformed. I would. They're my people. I can't judge any other way. I'm third generation into this thing. My great great grandfather, went to a Reformed Church of America in Spring Lake, Michigan, just outside of Muskegon. Sent his son there to start, and and found the obituary for him last time I was in Massachusetts. It was really cool. So when someday when I sit down with the Lord and he says, hey, you were formed by the Christian Reformed Church. What do you think of that? I'll say thank you. They're my people. I love them. How would you characterize your channel? What do you think it fundamentally centers around? What philosophical or theological framework would you say it centers around? Well, it certainly comes out of me, and so there's a lot of Dutch Reformed framework in there, but I've also got a fair amount of formation from the civil rights movement through my father's theological journey in Paterson, New Jersey. If you want to read about him, he's got a memoir that's self-published on Amazon. You can also Chad got a hard copy of it. Woo-hoo! Mine's right over there somewhere. Got one in the church library. It's a fun read. So I'm formed by all that. I'm also formed by, I'm struggling. So IDW doesn't really. Peugeot was right. Post-progressive is probably a better way to talk about what's happening. And I'm sure Nate would have some good words for us. So, yeah. How would you characterize your channel? I think I've done that quite a bit. It's a accumulation of, I like to have conversations with people. I like to hear their stories. And I think many people's stories. I think this world of screens that we're embedded in is incredibly distorting. And even my randos conversations are distorted, of course, because any selection of data is a distortion from the whole, but it's a distortion that we need. And this is what Vervaeke talks about when he talks about bias and relevance realization. That, it's two sides of the same coin. You just have to pare the world down. So my channel is, as I said earlier, my channel is one big, rather selfish attempt to know the world better. And you're all playing with me. I think Grizz gets it as well as just about anybody. We're participating in this hive mind, and it's the third lobe or the third hemisphere, or we're plugging into each other's minds, and hopefully with a degree of kindness and productivity, learning from each other. And it's very eclectic and rather diverse in many respects. And we're doing this so that we can see the world better through each other. And that's what my channel's about. It's certainly not about producing high quality, well thought through YouTube content. Every time I see YouTube talking to me like a content creator, I think I'm not a content creator. I'm breaking down the fourth wall. So that's how I'd characterize it. Are you aware of the Seeker of Unity channel? Yes. I just dropped my lens cap. John Vervaeke has done some collaboration with them recently. Zevi, the content creator, recently did a very interesting podcast. Oh, I dropped it again. I'm so freaking ADHD. Drives me crazy. Now I'm a little warm, so I'm going to turn on the fan. Didn't work. Zevi, the content creator, recently did a very interesting podcast on a big effort by modern Kabbalists to reveal their secrets and establish more of an open mystical tradition in conversation with other mystical and wisdom traditions from all over the world. What's your opinion on these kinds of mystical Kabbalist practices? Don't really know enough about them. And when I say my channel is selfish, if something grabs my interest, and I'm really ADHD, as anybody who looks at how many unfinished threads of thought I have should be aware of. Roughly speaking, I know a little bit of what you mean by it, but I haven't dug into it. There's just so much in the world to dig into. So how do you read the Bible? What are the techniques that you use when reading it? Well, it depends. If I'm sort of reading devotionally, I'll tend to sort of go through the Psalms. For a number of years, I would go through and read every fifth Psalm because I was reading them sequentially. And then I got kind of tired of that, so that I'd read every fifth one. It doesn't really, it's kind of a dumb way to go about it. Then sometimes I'll just sit and read through a whole book of the Bible. And then sometimes I'll just dip into things that I think, oh, I want to read more about that. Oh, I want to read more about that. So it sort of follows. I've done read the Bible in a year things before. There's so many different ways. I've done daily office type things before. Again, I'm just really ADHD. And so I do lots of different things. And then so for a long time, and in church, I've done series, and then I've done books of the Bible, and I have, and then I'm in and out of lectionaries. So it's just all over the map. And I find these various things to be useful in different ways. And then sometimes more audio Bible stuff, because I find that when I hear the Bible instead of reading it, it impacts me in a different way. So it's good to both read it with your eyes and hear it with your ears. Towards the end of my father's life, his last 10 years or so, he did a lot of biblical memorization. He had memorized the book of Ephesians, the book of Colossians. He was memorizing some of the epistles. That's a fun thing too. And for a while in my little cluster, some of the guys were doing biblical memorization and recitation. In other words, every time. Next week, I'm going to have a friend of mine, Kevin Adams, on the channel, hopefully. He wrote a book about baptism, so we'll talk about that, because when you write a book, the publishers are like, you got to do some promoting of your book. We got about 600 of them on the shelf, and we don't want to store them anymore. So get out there and sell those books. So my friend Kevin Adams will be on the channel, and Kevin and I go way back. And so he was doing sort of biblical recitation, and the idea was, whenever you preach on a text, memorize the text. Because the tradition in our church was for sermons. Now, I don't practice this, and that's a way that I'm really weird in the CRC. Generally speaking, first you read the text, and then the pastor comments on the text. I think that's just sort of comes out of the synagogue tradition. But I would rather include the reading of the text in the disclosure of the sermon, and that's why my sermons have the form they have. But instead of reading the text at the front of the sermon, a bunch of people were memorizing the text and then speaking the text from memory, which is a cool thing. So my wife and I have recently been hosting friends with china and silver that our grandparents used. Our parents thought too valuable to use, and our generation, except us, never saw used. Boy, that's true. That was my mother had a china cabinet, and it was exactly like you say. There was china and silver, and it's every now and then it would get hauled out for a special occasion. But for the most part, I remember growing up asking my mother, why do we have this stuff? It just seems to be taking up space. And I don't know if it was a Dutch thing or what, but we would, if maybe it's a poor thing, if If like there was a box of especially good cookies, it would sit in the cupboard waiting for a special occasion, and it would so often get stale. It's like, open the cookies and eat them. But as a kid, you're always looking up at them thinking, those cookies must be amazing. Otherwise, why would they be kept from us? Oh, so true. And therefore did not value at all. Unfortunately, the oldest generation has passed away, and we don't live near our parents. And to relearn the formal dining skills were taught us minimally as children, do we have etiquette books inherited? But how do we use old material culture and embodied wisdom along with other generational handoff impoverished young people without it being horribly misused or the whole thing descending into a LARP? Oh, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for. What's amazing about that China, though, is if you go to a thrift store, it's full of them. There's always this weird cycle of like coin collecting. I did coin collecting when I was a kid, like many other kids my age. So a coin comes out and everybody just uses it. And some people set, the new ones aside. And then, when I was growing up, the United States government stopped using silver in coins after 1964. And so you had all of this money from 1965 on that was just used and used and used, and they made massive amounts of it. And, of course, everyone, I would, get rolls of, my coin collecting amounted to getting a friend of mine that I coin collected with. His father had a coffee shop. And so they had a cash register. And so he would always sort of be able to get to go through the change at his father's store and pluck out all the silver coins and pluck out all the unusual coins. I would go to the bank and get rolls of pennies and nickels and dimes, and I'd go through the rolls, and then I'd take out the ones I wanted to keep, and I'd re-roll them and go to the bank and get some more, and you do all that kind of stuff as a kid. But there's this cycle in which, this fancy china was just cherished heirlooms, and it sat in china cabinets forever. And what is considered, this again is where sort of technology continues to change, because part of what happened was that manufacturing made certain things that in previous generations had been high culture than common culture. So I don't know. It's a good question. Don't know how to answer it. Please explain John Vervaking throwing nerdy wizard dice for protection in your last video. I was making the point that Hans-Georg Müller basically saying, well, if we recognize that these social media things are impacting us, and in his very early videos, when he first started making videos, he basically had a warning at the beginning of the video that said, this video and this whole platform is designed to influence your mind. Which is the thing that Grim Grizz does all the time. But the way Grim does it is way more fun and actually way more effective than this guy who is a university professor and has a big 60,000 sub, that's not a big channel on YouTube, but a 60,000 sub channel on YouTube, and there's little Grim Grizz just peeping up over 1,000, which in my effective is far more effective and insightful than that silly warning about getting colonized by the algorithm. And that's the point that, in my opinion, Grim Grizz is doing it way better than Hans-Georg Müller and is a whole lot more fun to watch. And if you want to have a conversation with Hans-Georg Müller, good luck. Probably not going to happen. Want to have a conversation with Grim Grizz? Go to his channel. He'll talk to you. Go to Chino. You'll shake hands with him. This, a little bit earlier, I was asked, what do you think? What's my channel about? This is what my channel is about. Everybody will look around and they'll say, oh, that Hans-Georg Müller, Carefree Wandering, or Jordan Peterson, or Paul Vanderklay, or John Vervaeke. Ooh, no. There are people with no YouTube channels or tiny YouTube channels that are that in some ways are doing things that are way more important, smart, significant, cool than the bigger channels. And if you're willing to condescend and be a little bit humble, you can find gold in them, their tiny YouTube channels. So go out there and get them. And this little corner is full of them. You know, I'll take a bunch of the that's right, he did do some on etiquette. I'll take a bunch of people in this little corner and have conversations with them. You know, the people that we're talking to, the people that are doing channels, these are brilliant, wonderful people, and you can have a personal relationship with them. This has been my argument about small churches before. You know, everybody wants to go to the big church with the cool music and the great parking lot and the amazing sound system. You know, you go to Living Stones right now and we don't even have a pianist. We're singing a cappella, and sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's rough. The sermon may or may not land. The person sitting next to you might ask you for $5 or $10 to go and buy a soda or cigarettes with. You might see the schizophrenic in the back that keeps getting up and getting cookies. And you might have to drive around the shopping cart to get into the parking lot. But if you have eyes to see, there are treasures in little places. And I see the world as chasing big names and big stars and big celebrities and big things. And God has given us the little things to shame the wise. And so that's why this is a little corner. And, you know, even you might think, oh, you know, PVK and John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot. I mean, when Jonathan Peugeot does these events like we're going to do in Chino, as Catherine says, he gets a little mobbed. You know, people get around him and want to ask Jonathan Peugeot what, you know, the two prophets in the book of Revelation symbolize and what he thinks about them and yada, 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 yada. But if you go to a conference like Chino, if you spend a little bit of time talking to people that are nobodies, nobody knows their name, nobody knows who they are, you might discover an amazing wealth of wisdom and love and quirkiness and all sorts of things that are that are out there in the wild. And that's the fun of it. That is the fun of it. So that's why, you know, so like I mentioned, my wife, she was tired. She went to bed early. I'm usually the one that falls asleep earlier, but she was tired. She went to bed early, and it's like, oh, I've got about an hour and a half to kill. I never have like a free hour and a half to kill. What do I want to do with my time? It's like, okay, I got all this streaming TV and all this TV. I don't want to watch any of that. So they go to YouTube. And then all of these videos that I should watch of really smart, thinky-talky people like David Bentley Hart and Ian McGilchrist and all these big names and big videos. I don't want to do that. I like that stuff. I listen to that stuff a lot. I don't want to do that right now. Oh, Grimm is streaming. I'm on. You know, bang. That's what I want to do. And, ooh, look, 8 people watching. And they're all there in the live chat. And so then we're, you know, chatting together and enjoying each other. And yeah. To me, that's way more fun. It's way more fun. And that's what the dice rolling means. It means that Grim Grizz is way better at it than Hans Georg Mueller, if you ask my opinion. And his saving throws are genius. Goes to the big churches anymore. They're just too crowded. And Joey, you know, where are you going to find a Joey? Oh, there we go. Oh, what else we got here? Chad the Alcoholic. Are we just playing door games trying to get into heaven? No door games. See what I mean? See what I mean? This is way more fun than waiting in an OMG line that you paid $200 for to have 30 seconds to shake the man's hand and get a picture. Again, I've done it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's really cool. I'm glad I've done it when I've done it. It's totally cool. But, you know, we got Chad the Alcoholic. How much more fun can you get? I mean, watch his videos when he's tiling. I mean, my wife wishes I knew how to tile like Chad. She'd have me tiling the bathroom right now. So why isn't one of the 10 commandments to not tell the truth, or at least don't lie? It kind of is. That's the spirit of the law underneath. One of the spirits underneath thou shalt not bear false witness. So all right. Well, I've used up all the time. I don't know. Should I drop the link in and do a little bit of chatting before I got to do my sermon? What do you think? Someone out there just really got to get in and say something? Yeah, that's right. PVK needs a pianist. You know, Sam, if you want to move to Sacramento, you can play the piano anytime you want in my church. So there's the link. If anybody wants to come in quick, I'll shut it down by 12:30. I'll tell you what, we'll do that. So thank you for all your questions. Again, this is really fun. I have a good time doing it. Replace the pinned message. There we go. All right. So the link is out there. The channel is open if you want to drop in and ask a question or say a little something, but again, your camera has to be on. Oh, yeah. Well, maybe we'll do that one of these Fridays. I don't know what you want to talk about Kale, or which of the ContraPoints videos. Oh, it's so funny, this time zone thing, because it was on last night, and you know, Israel and Europe were just getting up, and oh, here's Mark. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Paul. How are you?
Good.
Yeah.
Still daylight there, huh?
Still daylight. It's 8 p.m. So it is. Yeah. So I thought I'd drop in and say hello.
Yeah, you're pretty far north, so it stays lighter longer, I guess.
Yeah. You usually start at tea time over here, so you usually start at 6 p.m. So there's a bit of a balance between catching the Q&A and grabbing tea with the family.
Yeah. You left a comment. What were you talking about? It was either on Twitter or in the comments section. I'm trying to think, but you kind of pointed me to something. I'm trying to think it was. I didn't have a chance to really follow up on it, but it grabbed my interest.
It wasn't all the Grant Morrison stuff, was it?
Oh yeah, there was some of that stuff. Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah.
So I am kind of going through that, but the problem is I go through about 6 audiobooks at a time, and I kind of switch between them all the time, and then I add new ones, and then ones drop out. But the Grant Morrison stuff is interesting. The whole comic book world is interesting. I didn't get into them as a kid. I think I had one comic book I bought on one vacation, and that was it. So
yeah.
Oh, Ewan asked the question that I couldn't answer.
Yeah, that tends to happen. People don't understand my questions. Even in my church, I ask questions and I have to clarify it. It happens in school too. I ask questions and then I have to clarify it a few times.
Well, now's your shot. So if you want to.
Just the chat was like, oh, you can look up tutorials on YouTube for how to use etiquette. But that's the thing, is I don't want to be like, oh, hey, come over to my place. We'll have a thing. By the way, here are the rules. Right? Like, no, sorry, guys. That's not the problem. Because even if I could be the perfect gentleman and have everything Edwardian, which is maximum, because those are invented traditions. But if it was maximum strictness, only footmen doing the serving, sorry, but my guests would have no idea what to do. And that's not a good gathering. That's bad. So,
and yet we're always immersed in etiquette anyway, because when someone violates etiquette, we all know it.
Yeah. That's the thing we have in Ireland as well, the fine china.
Really? The same thing where it's too good to ever be used?
Yeah, and the good biscuits as well. Yeah. Or cookies. Yeah.
Why is that? I mean, what's with that?
No, it's a real mystery. One time I busted out some like silver plated goblets to give somebody something to drink. And he was like, why that? It was cheaper than IKEA. You know, nobody wants this. Also, if I drop it, it won't break, you know? And if it's potent, it'll change color. Right. But like, there you go. Silver goblets are just nothing. They're floating around everywhere. It's completely bonkers. You know,
There was a thing a few years ago, Paul, I think I read, where it's to do with the new era in the sense that back in the 80s, it was material things that people collected, you know, ornaments and collectibles. But now it's more, I don't know if this is a fair comment now, it's more about collecting experiences. So what you would put on your cupboard and show off to your friends, now you put on your iPhone, your Instagram shots. That's not the complete answer, but it's maybe an element of it.
right. We get deceived by that as well. You know, it's like, oh, I'm a minimalist. I don't have material possessions. It's like, how many millions of hours of books and things do you have on your phone? Right. Makes us feel like we're being ascetic, but actually it's gone even farther than ever before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. So my wife, I talk about, you know, about a year ago, we had the purge at our house where my wife decided, nah, that's it. No more clutter. The kids had left and it's like, we're going to get control of this thing. And, which is really good. We were able to, it's unusual in Northern California to be able to park your car in the garage, but we've got both of our cars in the garage. And, it's also the fact that we no longer have 7 people living in the house. We have 2 living in the same house. So it's just a lot easier but went through closets and got rid of clothes. And, you know, part of it I noted too, in the Dominican Republic when I lived there, I mean, people were very poor. And so they didn't have much stuff. They didn't have many clothes. A lot of poor people in America. I mean, the homeless people, I couldn't, I mean, I see some of them with 2-3 shopping carts, and it's a continual issue. So, and then one of the homeless guys is always bringing stuff he hauls out of the garbage. Says, I found this. This is perfectly good. Do you want it? No. Well, give it to someone. I don't entrust it to me. You plucked it out of someone's garbage. You give it to someone. And then he leaves it on the property and I got to throw it away.
Yeah.
It's a product of manufacturing. We have manufactured stuff like mad.
Yeah.
Filled the world with it.
I think that's part of it as well. There's the guys in the UK. There's a documentary maker called Adam Curtis. He does documentaries for the BBC, and he was saying that part of the thing in the late 70s was that in China they decided to enter into low cost manufacturing. So that was late 70s. So then what you find during the 80s, especially in the 90s, with the change in trade laws, that the West got flooded with lots of cheap stuff. So what you would have had in the past is you would have saved up and bought something and really looked after it and thought it was a precious thing to take care of. But with this market being flooded with so much cheap stuff and people have multiple things, everything started to lose its value as well and be commoditized. It's because you remember my mom and dad, you remember them buying things, saving up for things, repairing them, fixing them, cleaning them, repairing shoes, things like that. You know, I don't know what it's like in the US, but there used to be a lot of cobblers or shoe repair shops over here, but they're all gone now.
Yep.
You might find one for very expensive shoes, and you used to be able to get worse for anyone in the UK as well. I used to get shoe repair kits, but they're non-existent anymore. It's just everything has become devalued.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a YouTube video that my wife showed to me, actually, you know, why everything breaks now. And part of it is also that people also get accustomed to certain price levels. And with material costs rising and the cost of labor rising, the cost of engineering rising, people are used to paying this much for an article of clothing, this much for a piece of, you know, utensil or something. And mentally, we sort of keep it here. And so then they just, you know, make it cheaper to produce. And also they know that for the most part, people aren't going to use it for very long. Yeah, and it's just going to go away.
Yeah. Which is a shame. Yeah.
And the clothing that's donated clothing completely destroyed manufacturing clothing production in the developing world. So everyone in the Dominican Republic was just wearing clothing that had been given to Goodwill or to thrift stores and things, and because they can only sell so much of it, and then they put it in these huge bales and they sell it overseas, and then that's what everyone in the Dominican Republic wore. And it was so funny because sometimes they would be wearing T-shirts that would be, do you know what that shirt means? And clearly they don't. The Haitian pastors, they thought they were really styling when they were wearing like a Playboy ball cap, and it'd be like, this is a community where you don't even let your women wear pants, and you're wearing a ball cap that says Playboy. It's just all these crazy things.
Yeah. Indeed. It's interesting to say that as well, Paul. The village that you were in when you were over in Northern Ireland, way back when I was growing up in it, it had a shirt factory, and shirt making was quite a big industry in this part of the world, and linen and the like. But just last year, it was saying at the Times, where the shirt factory is, there's now opened a gin distillery.
Open to what?
A gin distillery. Do you have gin in the US?
A gin distillery.
Yeah, gin distillery. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, beer microbreweries are all over the place now in the US.
Yeah.
So we had our estuary meeting in a hop garden, and they had, of course, all kinds of beer that you could get on tap. And then they had this huge cooler, which was full of every conceivable tiny little bougie microbrew, and they had a corking fee for the cans. In other words, you'd have to give them the can and you get $2 just to pop the top.
Yeah.
I just had my water bottle. That's all I drink.
I've actually been to Grand Rapids, which I think is that beer city in the US. It was work. So there was loads of microbreweries, and it reminded me of Germany slightly, walking around Grand Rapids, with all the beer companies. Yeah.
Well, these Dutchmen in West Michigan, Grand Rapids used to be a big furniture manufacturing city, but again, because so much furniture was sort of outsourced to the developing world, they had to figure out what to do. And Grand Rapids is the Hollanders there are very industrious, and the Poles too. Grand Rapids is sort of half Dutch and half Polish.
Okay. Yeah.
And the Poles are, of course, Catholic, and the Dutch are, of course, Reformed, and very, very energetic people. When one industry sort of goes away, they sort of lean into another, and up they come. So actually, Grand Rapids used to be a place where you could get very affordable housing, but it's become kind of a fancy place now. So
yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a good trip. We were there for a week. It was work during the day, but we got out in the evenings, just sort of business lunches and stuff. But there's one of the nights we ended up in I can't remember the name of the place, but it was good. It was good. Yeah.
It's also a good place to buy Dutch Reformed books. So you had Zondervan's, Bakers, and Kriegel in Grand Rapids, and so they had lots of. When I was in seminary there, you could get. Back when you bought real books, you could buy like misprints and things like that, and you could get them at like 1/10 of the costs, which was great for a theology student.
Nice one.
Now, there's a good restaurant, and there's a really good Chinese buffet in Grand Haven, Professor Luigi. I remember going there with my wife's aunts when we were there a few years ago, and my son liked it when he was in Grand Rapids too. So there are Chinese restaurants are all over the world. It'd be amazing. You could go to any major city in the world and find Chinese restaurants.
Chinese restaurants and Irish pubs.
That's right.
Yeah. It's funny you're talking about books. I've got a copy, and I bought it in a Reformed Presbyterian secondhand bookshop. Copies of John Wesley's journals.
Oh, okay.
Of all places to get them, they're quite an old copy. Now I would be lying if I said I've read them all. I think I've read maybe a bits here and there, but that was quite a find.
Yeah. Before the Second World War, the big enemies of the Dutch Reformed in America were, of course, the Papists and the atheists and the Methodists.
Okay.
The CRC very much wanted to make sure to not have Methodism win the day, but it did. It did.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a true Hollander. Hey, Aaron.
A true Hollander. Yeah, that's true. Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I think you're only streaming for another 15 minutes, but I thought I'd hop on in just for the end of it. But yeah, no, I'm good. It's the evening here, but it's still light out. So we have the Liberation Day today, as you might know, of the Second World War, kind of celebrating that, we've been liberated on the 5th of May in 1945. So it's a good day in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Wow.
For sure. Nice.
Yeah, Job had some things to say about the Germans in Rotterdam when I was there. So
yeah, right. Yes, that's a sensitive issue. Yeah. Good.
One thing that amazed me about Europe was just how small it is, and just obviously it was large before you had automobiles and trains, but you think, wow, this is not a lot of you don't have to go real far to go between the Netherlands and Germany. It was pretty it was quite, but then the world changed quite a bit. Vendonk, I thought Vendonk was going to be useful, but once we got into Germany, Vendonk was totally useless.
Yeah, no, I could have. It's so interesting. Like even within the Netherlands, like we're still trying to sometimes set up an estuary group, and it's like, oh, but like Utrecht to Amsterdam, like that's way too long a distance, and we're just comparing it to America, where people are just willing to travel like 3 hours, and it's all fine. We're spoiled here in terms of distances and culture.
Yeah, and you got great trains too.
That's true. Yeah. We're working on it. Believe me. Yeah. That's nice. And I went to the Peterson show on Monday in Rotterdam.
Oh,
actually. Yeah, he was in Rotterdam.
Really?
Yeah.
What were your impressions?
Mostly good. Like, so the core message is still very much there. It was at least to me, it was a huge audience. It was like 4,000 people in a huge, arena almost, basically. It was interesting to hear, but I could also tell the thing that was most concerning to me was, concerning sounds such a big word, but that whenever he did bring up political issues, like he brought up the farming crisis, COVID, trans issues, that's really when the audience clapped like the hardest. So you could kind of tell that there's still this strong sort of conservative pull coming to, and still the core message was really good. Like I think he connected some parts of like his biblical lectures with his psychology stuff very interestingly, but that stuff just kind of, I don't know, gave it a dark edge, if I dare to say so. But it was good overall. I went with my dad and my brother, so yeah.
So who in the Netherlands, who was there in the crowd? What were your impressions of the people that went there?
Yeah, so I would still say that the majority was male, but what was I guess most interesting to me was like the multi-generational aspect. And that indeed, like also the diversity, like you could really tell that there were also like these groups of Islamic guys, for instance, all going to see him. So there was a lot more sort of ethnic diversity than I had expected, even though I could still see the sort of that the main target audience was, in terms of, ethnically speaking and sexually speaking, it was white men. But it was really hard to say because you could tell that everyone was there for a different reason. Like some people really like just thought he was a good voice against the authoritarianism of the COVID measures, and other people were there for the psychology stuff. So it was actually kind of confusing to be there in some ways, because I didn't feel like a connection to the people there, except for the fact that everyone was like, okay, now we're here at this controversial event because there's always protests happening.
Were there protests?
No, I mean, they were announced in some ways, like to like some people were first intending to do that, but no, it's also like way too far off the city center, so it wouldn't really have made sense. Now it was good, actually. Like I also saw a Dutch politician there, which was interesting to see, who was like in the Christian Middle Party. So, but to be fair, she actually got kicked out of the party because some of the things she said during COVID were too controversial. So it was interesting to see her there as well. And I went with some people of the estuary groups as well, so they were there too. It was a good experience overall, for sure. Yeah.
It was interesting because when we were in the Netherlands, we had all the upside down flags, and because of course Vendonk and Job drove me everywhere here, and the pronouncement of Vendonk was, we're just seeing all these flags and all this stuff about the farms, and the donk, C said, I'll bet you, if we bet $100 or $100, he said, I bet you that all of this stuff won't move a single vote in Parliament. Not a single, not their party won't get one extra seat because of all of this. And then, of course, he came back and said, I lost my bet.
Yeah, clearly so. Yeah, no, I mean, it was a wave of difference, actually. So that was interesting, which also actually became a bit of a sensitive issue this week because of the Liberation Day, that we sort of really didn't want to have the upside down flags, while like we wanted to have them like the right side up, because we really celebrated. And I think pretty much everyone honored that. But most people, like, they kind of took them down after that huge win of the Dutch Farmers Party. Since then, it's kind of been okay. I think so far it's been a good development. It's hard to say because like they only had one seat in Parliament, and we'll have to see how they grow now. But so far it seems to be going okay. Yeah, so that's good.
Interesting. No, I told Van Donk, I said, well, we should probably have you and maybe someone, I don't know, your father or you or someone on the channel, and we can talk about that. I don't know much about it, but being in the Netherlands and watching the developments, I found it interesting. Of course, John had a lot of thoughts because he had talked about the question of nitrogen and all of that back when he was living there and working in dairies and such. So there's actually a lot more history to it than I knew anything about.
Yeah, no, that's true. That does go way back. But to be honest, like, I'm not the right person to be asked about nitrogen too. So I couldn't. But then again, my dad, he's politically active, at least in our municipality. So he had to sort of take a stance and really read up on it. So he would be able to tell you one or two things about it that might be interesting.
Okay. Okay. Well,
so maybe we can organize that call at some point if you want.
That would be fun. It would be fun. I just posted on CRC Voices, John Van Donk singing at this park we went to with Job and Sarah. The song that John had learned as a kid about the damming of the Zuiderzee and how the loss of it is crazy.
That's great. That's great.
So do you have everything you wanted to ask or anything you wanted to say? We still have 7 minutes.
Well, I just wanted to say, like, I'm really enjoying sort of the content that you're putting out this week, and also like you're an excellent pastor, because indeed, like what you just emphasized also on the sort of roasting Hans-Georg Müller a little bit, and then sort of praising all the little channels. It was like, yes, that's a good reminder that, like, I actually hadn't thought about the fact that this little corner that sort of we're little, and that's kind of the point. So I'm really enjoying that, but also need all the discussions surrounding authenticity and combining that with all the sort of the fakey stuff at the moment on AI. It's a really interesting moment because you get sort of authenticity from the cultural front, but then that's sort of being confronted by developments in technology. So it's very strange how it's all coming together, but not really a question, just sort of speaking out my fascination on the subject. Yeah.
Paul,
go ahead.
Sorry, Paul. Have you seen the Tom Holland on Justin Bridley's new show yet?
On Justin Riley's no show? No. Are they?
It was out this week. It's the podcast. So I listened to it today. It's worth listening to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I hadn't seen that one yet.
Yeah.
So I should. There's. I have my policy. I don't like chasing names, but I thought I kind of like to talk to Justin. I like to have Justin on the channel and talk about this. And of course, Tom's always welcome. And I really enjoyed my conversation with Mary Harrington. I wish she didn't have 2 hours, but she has the best excuse possible. She says, I can give you an hour because I've got my daughter after that. I said, I'm not gonna fight with you over that.
That's good.
But I would like to have Justin on because this transition is a big deal. It's a big deal, at least for me. Unbelievable. I've listened to Unbelievable for years. That I think that was really an excellent creative project, especially sort of in the heat of the new atheism days. And he's really sort of transitioned. Interesting. And so now this transition from less of a ref to more of a player, it'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, Justin was great. He had I came across Jordan pretty early on, but one of the first encounters was on Unbelievable, that discussion that he had.
Yep.
And then a couple of weeks later, he had NT Wright and Tom Holland.
Yep.
Well, I had those two guys in quick succession, so it was quite. Yeah, we're stabilizing influence, I think, on sort of the faith journey.
Yep.
For different reasons.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, Justin's done an amazing job the last few years. How he keeps us cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He is such a nice guy. So we had that event at the seminary in London, and then Justin drove us to the restaurant where, you know, a bunch of us got together after, and then actually he drove us back to where John Verdonk and I were staying in the Netherlands. And driving in London, I mean, I grew up driving in Patterson. I thought that was something, but driving in London was a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
But he's such a sweet guy. He's so friendly and personable, and like he is on video is just like he is off video. I mean, very sweet guy.
Can imagine. Yeah.
So
nice.
Yeah, no, I'll have to catch that. There's so much right now. Vervaeke had a conversation with someone about Christianity and AI. I want to catch that.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about this bigger video with Tristan about the dangers of AI. It's a very interesting thing, especially comparing it, let's say, to the Manhattan Project and the nuclear detonation, because if you ask how the Manhattan Project changed the world, it's really a complicated question, because we don't have, we've had 2 nuclear detonations in war, let's say. We have nuclear power, and that's obviously had a significant impact, especially in Europe. But the way that nuclear weapons have changed warfare and politics by their absence is also interesting. So history is a tremendously complex thing.
Yeah,
it's tough to sort of get a picture of it and understand it.
Did it hit the newswire over in the US? The BBC made a bit of a deal of this Google engineer who's 75. I think he's a Canadian engineer who resigned from Google so he can speak freely about AI. So the BBC had an exclusive interview with him. So he was saying that he regrets some of his work. It was like headlines.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, you could argue he didn't have a lot to lose because he was 75. But the fact that he then retired, he could have went off, and enjoyed his retirement. But he made a point of sort of saying, "Yeah, I kind of regret some of the work that I've done."
Huh? That's interesting.
He's known as I think I've got this right. He's known as one of the grandfather of AI. This Jan. We don't see. I'll see if I can find his name here.
Yeah, see if you can find his name. Also, any thoughts about the coronation? That's another fascinating. A coronation. It's like, I think Tom Holland exactly right. What does that mean in this world? You can really see the difference between, of course, Elizabeth II's coronation in the 1950s and now her son here in the 2020s. Oh,
yeah.
They still at least aren't going to televise the whole thing, which is nice. Right? The chrism is
right.
Not recorded. Theoretically, I'm concerned somebody would probably smuggle something in there.
It's good. Well, even just the attempt to keep it from being recorded is interesting, because that's different from not being able to record, let's say, before moving pictures or photography. So fascinating.
You would need another live stream, Paul, because the monarchy and the coronation is quite a divisive issue.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, I think that will definitely become a topic. I'm only halfway through The Rest is History's treatment of the coronation, and I've watched Gavin Ashenden has made some videos about it, and some others in the UK. So it's interesting. All right, so Ethan wants to know where the PVK live stream after party is at today. Anybody know? Anybody going to stream one? I can't. I got work to do after this, so I can't do it myself.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I also have plans. So
Need more hosts so that Jacob's 24-hour network can be realized. Discord, Discord, definitely at the Bridges of Meaning Discord. Rando's United streaming anyway. That, and even the transition from Discord to StreamYard, it's interesting. The world keeps turning.
Yeah.
Jacob won't let on. All right. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you all for joining me on the channel, and thank you those who asked questions on the Bridges of Meaning Discord. And as always, thank you for time and attention. And God bless you all. And may the coronation be eventful in all the good ways.
sure.
Thanks, Jess.
Yes.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good weekend. Yeah. Thank you.